They called it the marriage of the season, a union forged in duty, sealed with indifference. Lady Eleanor Ashford had walked down the aisle toward a man whose eyes held nothing but cold politeness, whose vows rang hollow in the cavernous chapel. Duke Callum Ravenswood had made his position devastatingly clear. She would bear his name, manage his household, and remain invisible in every way that mattered. "You are my Duchess only in name," he had whispered during their first dance, his grip on her waist as distant as his heart. But on their wedding night, when candlelight flickered across the bedchamber and he turned away to undress, Eleanor glimpsed what no one else had seen, a tapestry of scars carved across his back, each one telling a story of suffering he had buried beneath aristocratic perfection. In that moment, she realized the man she had married was not the heartless duke society believed him to be, but a prisoner of secrets so dark they had turned his soul to stone. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you're listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled. The morning of Eleanor Ashford's wedding dawned with the kind of oppressive grey that seemed to press down upon London itself, as though the heavens mourned what she could not. From her window at Ashford House in Mayfair, she watched the rain trace melancholy patterns against the glass, each droplet a tiny rebellion she wished she possessed the courage to emulate. "Stand still, my lady," her maid Beatrice murmured, fastening the final pearl button along Eleanor's spine. The wedding gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk and Brussels lace, commissioned by her father at extraordinary expense. It fit her like a beautiful prison, each stitch a reminder of the life being sewn shut around her. Eleanor was 22, with hair the colour of autumn chestnuts that caught fire in sunlight, and eyes of such clear grey they seemed to reflect the stormy English skies themselves. Her beauty was the quiet kind, the sort that revealed itself slowly in the intelligence of her gaze and the gentle curve of her smile. But today that smile had vanished entirely. "You look like a princess from a fairy tale," Beatrice said softly, though her eyes betrayed her sadness. She had been with Eleanor since childhood and knew the truth. This was no fairy tale. The Ashford family, though titled and respected, had been hemorrhaging money for years. Her father, Viscount Ashford, had made disastrous investments in railway schemes that had collapsed spectacularly. The estate in Gloucestershire was mortgaged to the hilt, the London house barely maintained. Eleanor had 3 younger sisters, whose futures depended entirely on this match. Her marriage to Duke Callum Ravenswood would erase every debt, restore the family's standing, and secure her sister's prospects. She had never been given a choice. "The carriage is ready, Eleanor." Her mother appeared in the doorway, resplendent in plum silk, her face carefully composed. Lady Ashford had once been a beauty herself, but years of managing a declining household had etched fine lines around her mouth. "Your father is waiting." Eleanor turned from the window, her reflection in the full-length mirror showing a stranger, a bride adorned for sacrifice. "Mother, No." Lady Ashford's voice was gentle but firm. She crossed the room and took Eleanor's hands. "I know what you would say, my darling, but this is the way of our world. You will be a duchess, you will want for nothing material, and in time, perhaps affection will grow." But Eleanor had met Duke Callum Ravenswood only 3 times before today. Each encounter had been brief, formal, and utterly devoid of warmth. The first meeting had occurred at a ball at Devonshire House 2 months prior. Eleanor had been standing near the refreshment table when a ripple of whispers announced his arrival. The Duke of Ravenswood was 30 years old, a man of legendary wealth and impeccable lineage. His estate in Northumberland was said to be one of the finest in England. His investments in shipping and textiles had multiplied his already substantial fortune, and his appearance in society was rare enough to cause a sensation. When he had approached her, Eleanor's breath had caught. He was tall and powerfully built, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes of such deep blue They appeared almost black in the candlelight. His features were aristocratic and severe, a strong jaw, high cheekbones, and a mouth that seemed carved from marble, for it never softened into a genuine smile. "Lady Eleanor Ashford," he had said, his voice a deep baritone that sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. "I am Callum Ravenswood. Your father and I have been discussing a matter of mutual interest." Even then, she had understood. She was the matter of mutual interest, a commodity to be negotiated. Their second meeting had been a formal dinner at Ashford House, where the marriage contract had been discussed with the same enthusiasm one might reserve for a business merger. Callum had been polite, distant, his attention more focused on the financial arrangements than on Eleanor herself. He had asked her precisely 3 questions. Did she play the pianoforte? Did she speak French? Did she have any objections to residing primarily in Northumberland? She had answered yes, yes, and no, though her heart had screamed 1,000 objections. The third meeting had been a brief walk in Hyde Park, chaperoned by her mother. Callum had offered his arm with mechanical courtesy, and they had strolled in near silence while he outlined his expectations. She would manage Ravenswood Hall, oversee the household staff, and host when required. She would conduct herself with dignity befitting her position. She would not interfere in his business affairs or question his absences. "I require a duchess in name and function," he had said, his tone as impersonal as if he were instructing a new secretary. "I do not require romance or sentiment. If you can accept these terms, we shall deal well enough together." Eleanor had felt something inside her wither and die, but she had nodded because 3 younger sisters depended on her compliance, because her father's desperation was palpable, because she had been raised to understand that duty superseded desire. Now, descending the stairs of Ashford House in her wedding finery, Eleanor felt the weight of that duty like chains. Her father waited in the entrance hall, his face a mixture of relief and guilt. Viscount Ashford had aged a decade in the past year, his hair gone entirely grey, his shoulders stooped. "My dearest girl," he whispered, kissing her forehead, "you are saving us all. I wish—" His voice broke. "I know, Papa." Eleanor squeezed his hand, forcing strength into her voice she did not feel. "It will be well." The journey to St. George's Church in Hanover Square passed in a blur of rain-slicked streets and curious onlookers. News of the Duke of Ravenswood's wedding had spread through London society like wildfire. Everyone wanted to glimpse the mysterious Duke who had finally chosen a bride. Inside the church, hundreds of candles flickered against the gloom, and the pews were filled with the cream of English aristocracy. Eleanor walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her eyes fixed on the man waiting at the altar. Callum Ravenswood stood like a statue carved from ice, his expression utterly unreadable. He was dressed in impeccable black tailcoat and grey waistcoat, a sapphire pin glinting in his cravat. As Eleanor approached, his eyes met hers for the briefest moment, and she saw nothing in their depths. No warmth, no anticipation, not even curiosity. Just a vast, carefully maintained emptiness. The ceremony proceeded with ritualistic precision. Eleanor heard herself make vows she barely comprehended, felt the cold weight of a ring slide onto her finger, and accepted Callum's brief, perfunctory kiss with numb acceptance. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, polite applause rippled through the congregation. She was now Eleanor Ravenswood, Duchess of Ravenswood, and she had never felt more alone. The wedding breakfast at Ravenswood House in Belgravia was a spectacle of excess that would be discussed in London drawing rooms for months to come. The Duke's London residence was a palatial Georgian mansion that spoke of wealth accumulated over centuries, soaring ceilings adorned with frescoes, crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow prisms across marble floors, and rooms filled with priceless art collected from across Europe. Eleanor moved through the reception in a daze, her hand resting lightly on Callum's arm as they greeted an endless stream of guests. Dukes and duchesses, Earls and countesses, members of parliament, and even a minor royal, all had come to witness the union and, Eleanor suspected, to scrutinize the woman who had captured England's most elusive bachelor. "Such a lovely bride," cooed the Duchess of Marlborough, her sharp eyes assessing Eleanor from head to toe. "And so young. You must be quite overwhelmed, my dear." "I'm honoured by the Duke's choice," Eleanor replied with practised grace, though the words tasted like ash. Callum stood beside her, the perfect picture of aristocratic composure, acknowledging congratulations with curt nods and minimal conversation. His hand at the small of her back was merely for show. There was no warmth in the touch, no possessive claim, just cold obligation. As the afternoon wore on, Eleanor noticed a woman watching them with particular intensity. She was perhaps 25, strikingly beautiful with golden hair arranged in elaborate curls and a gown of emerald silk that must have cost a fortune. Her blue eyes held a calculating gleam that made Eleanor's skin prickle with unease. "Who is that woman?" Eleanor whispered to Callum during a brief moment of privacy. He followed her gaze, and for the first time that day, something flickered across his face. Was it discomfort? Annoyance? It vanished so quickly Eleanor couldn't be certain. "Lady Vivian Hartley," he said flatly. "The Earl of Pemberton's daughter. No one of consequence." But the way Lady Vivian continued to stare suggested otherwise. The formal dinner that followed was an elaborate affair with 12 courses, each more extravagant than the last. Eleanor sat at the head of the table beside Callum, making polite conversation with the guests, while her stomach churned with anxiety. She barely touched the food, though she smiled and nodded at appropriate intervals. It was during the dessert course, a towering confection of spun sugar and cream, that everything began to unravel. Lady Vivian Hartley rose from her seat, her champagne glass held aloft. The gesture was unusual enough that conversation gradually died away, all eyes turning toward her. "I must propose a toast," Vivian announced, her voice carrying clearly through the dining room. Her smile was bright and brittle as glass. "To the Duke and Duchess of Ravenswood. May their marriage be everything they deserve." There was something in her tone, a subtle edge that made several guests exchange uncomfortable glances. Callum's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on his wine glass. "How generous, Lady Vivian," he said coolly. "Your well wishes are noted." But Vivian wasn't finished. She took a long sip of champagne, her eyes glittering with something dangerous. "I do hope, Your Grace, that your new Duchess understands the nature of the arrangement she has entered. It would be such a shame if she harbored any romantic illusions about this union." The room had gone utterly silent. Eleanor felt heat rising in her cheeks, confusion and humiliation warring within her. "That is quite enough," Callum said, his voice dropping to a tone that could freeze water. "Is it?" Vivian laughed, the sound high and slightly unhinged. "Forgive me. I simply find it amusing that everyone is pretending this is a love match when we all know the truth. The Ashfords needed money, and you needed a respectable wife to manage your household while you—" Lady Vivian, an older woman, the Countess of Pemberton, Vivian's mother, stood abruptly, her face pale with mortification. "You will sit down this instant." But Vivian was beyond restraint now, champagne and bitterness loosening her tongue. She turned to Eleanor, her smile vicious. "Did he tell you, Your Grace? Did your husband mention that until 3 months ago he and I had an understanding, that he promised me a future, only to cast me aside the moment his financial advisors suggested he needed a more advantageous match?" Eleanor's world tilted. She looked at Callum, searching his face for denial, for explanation, for anything. But his expression had gone completely blank, a mask of aristocratic indifference that revealed nothing. "You are mistaken," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "There was never any understanding between us." "Liar!" Vivian's composure shattered completely. You came to my bed, you whispered promises, and then you discarded me like I was nothing, less than nothing, to marry this insipid little nobody whose only virtue is her father's desperation." Gasps rippled through the room. Eleanor felt as though she might be sick. The humiliation was so profound, so public, that she couldn't draw breath. Every eye in the room was fixed on her, some pitying, some curious, some gleeful at the scandal unfolding. The Earl of Pemberton had reached his daughter now, gripping her arm firmly. "You will leave immediately," he hissed. "You have disgraced yourself and this family." As Vivian was escorted from the room, still hurling accusations and bitter laughter, Eleanor sat frozen in her chair. She wanted to flee, to disappear, to wake from this nightmare. But she was the Duchess of Ravenswood now, and dozens of aristocrats were watching to see how she would respond. Callum stood, his face carved from stone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for that unfortunate display. Lady Vivienne has clearly been overindulging and has allowed fantasy to overcome reason. There was never any relationship between us beyond casual acquaintance." But his denial rang hollow. Eleanor had seen the flash of something in his eyes when Vivienne first stood. Guilt, perhaps, or anger at being exposed. "I believe this evening has concluded," Callum continued, his tone brooking no argument. "Thank you all for attending. Good night." The guests began to depart with unseemly haste, whispering furiously among themselves. Eleanor remained seated, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her nails drew blood from her palms. She felt utterly shattered, the carefully constructed facade of her new life crumbling before it had even begun. When the last guest had gone, Callum turned to her. For a moment, she thought he might offer explanation or apology. Instead, he said, "You should retire to your chambers. It has been a long day." "Is it true?" Eleanor's voice emerged as barely a whisper. "Were you involved with her?" "My past is not your concern," he replied coldly. "Our arrangement does not include interrogations about my personal affairs." The words struck like a physical blow. Eleanor rose on trembling legs, her wedding gown suddenly feeling like a shroud. "I see. Then I shall retire, as you suggest." She walked from the dining room with as much dignity as she could muster, though inside she was screaming. Behind her, she heard Callum pour himself another drink, the clink of crystal against crystal echoing in the vast, empty room. In her new bedchamber, a lavish suite decorated in cream and gold that should have delighted her, Eleanor finally allowed the tears to fall. She had known this marriage was one of convenience, had accepted that Callum did not love her, but to be humiliated so publicly, to learn that she was merely a replacement for a discarded mistress, to be treated with such callous indifference on her wedding day, it was more than she had bargained for. A soft knock interrupted her misery. "Your Grace?" It was Callum's valet. "The Duke requests your presence in his chambers." Eleanor's blood ran cold. The wedding night. In all the chaos, she had almost forgotten. She was expected to fulfill her wifely duties, to submit to a man who had just demonstrated his complete lack of regard for her feelings. With shaking hands, she allowed her new lady's maid to help her into a nightgown of delicate white silk and a dressing gown of ivory satin. Then, with leaden feet, she walked through the connecting door into her husband's bedchamber. The Duke's bedchamber was a study in masculine austerity. Dark wood paneling, heavy burgundy drapes, and furniture that spoke of function rather than comfort. A fire burned low in the grate, casting flickering shadows across the room. Callum stood by the window, still dressed in his wedding attire, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He didn't turn when Eleanor entered. "Close the door," he said quietly. Eleanor obeyed, her heart hammering against her ribs. She stood uncertainly in the center of the room, waiting for him to speak, to move, to do something that would indicate what he expected of her. Finally, he turned. His face was haggard in the firelight, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked almost human, tired, troubled, and infinitely weary. He took a long drink, then set the glass down with deliberate care. "I will not touch you tonight," he said flatly, "or any night. unless you wish it. Our marriage need not include that particular obligation." Eleanor blinked, confusion momentarily overriding her distress. "I don't understand. I require a duchess to manage my household and maintain appearances in society. I do not require an intimate relationship." He turned back to the window, his shoulders rigid. "You may return to your chambers." It should have been a relief. Instead, Eleanor felt a surge of anger that surprised her with its intensity. "So I am to be your duchess in name only, a decorative fixture in your home, useful for hosting dinners and nothing more. That is the arrangement, yes. An arrangement you failed to fully disclose before our marriage." Eleanor's voice shook, but she pressed on. "Was Lady Vivian telling the truth? Were you involved with her? That is none of your concern. It became my concern when she humiliated me in front of half of London society." Eleanor's composure finally cracked. "I accepted this marriage to save my family. I agreed to your cold terms, your emotional distance, your complete lack of interest in me as a person. But I did not agree to be made a fool of, to be the subject of gossip and pity because you couldn't be bothered to end your affairs before taking a wife." Callum's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "I deserve at least the courtesy of honesty," Eleanor continued, tears streaming down her face now. "If I am to live this half-life as your duchess, I deserve to know what I'm truly part of." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then Callum moved to his wardrobe, extracting a dressing gown. "Vivian Hartley and I had a brief liaison last year. It meant nothing and was concluded months before I began seeking a wife. She has convinced herself there was more to it than there was. That is the truth, for what it's worth." He began to unbutton his waistcoat, his movements sharp with suppressed emotion. "Now, if you're quite finished with your interrogation, I suggest you—" He turned away to remove his shirt, and in that moment the firelight illuminated his bare back. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. His back was a landscape of scars, some thin and precise like knife cuts, others thick and raised like rope burns. They crisscrossed his skin in a pattern that spoke of systematic, prolonged torture. The worst were along his shoulder blades, where the flesh looked as though it had been repeatedly torn and healed, torn and healed. Callum realized his mistake immediately. He grabbed his dressing gown and shrugged it on with violent haste, but it was too late. Eleanor had seen. "Don't," he said harshly, not looking at her. "Don't ask. Don't speak of it. Forget what you saw." But Eleanor couldn't forget. In that brief glimpse, everything had shifted. The cold, distant duke she had married was not simply an unfeeling aristocrat. He was a man carrying wounds so deep they had shaped his very soul. "Callum," she whispered, "get out." His voice was raw, almost desperate. "Please, just go." Eleanor fled to her own chambers, her mind reeling. She lay awake until dawn, staring at the canopy above her bed, trying to reconcile the man who had treated her with such indifference with the scarred, suffering person she had glimpsed. The next morning, Eleanor woke to find a note slipped under her door. Callum had departed for his estate in Northumberland and would remain there for the foreseeable future. She was to stay in London and manage the Belgravia house as she saw fit. An allowance had been established for her use. He would send word when her presence was required. He had abandoned her the morning after their wedding. For 3 days, Eleanor remained in the vast, empty house, moving through rooms like a ghost. The servants were polite but distant, clearly unsure how to treat a duchess who had been so publicly humiliated and so quickly deserted. The scandal of Lady Vivian's outburst had spread through London like wildfire. Calling cards that should have flooded in remained conspicuously absent. Eleanor was a social pariah before her marriage had even truly begun. On the 4th day, salvation arrived in the form of Aunt Agatha. Lady Agatha Pembroke was Eleanor's maternal aunt, a widow of independent means who had scandalized society by refusing to remarry after her husband's death 15 years prior. Instead, she had taken her considerable inheritance and created a life of intellectual pursuit and social activism in Bath. She was 60 years old, sharp as a tack, and utterly uninterested in society's opinion of her. She swept into Ravenswood House like a force of nature, her travelling cloak still damp from the rain, her grey eyes blazing with purpose. "Where is that coward of a husband?" were her first words upon finding Eleanor in the morning room. "Northumberland," Eleanor replied dully. "Of course he is." Agatha stripped off her gloves and sat down uninvited. "Well, you're not staying here to wither away in this mausoleum. Pack your things. You're coming to Bath with me." "I can't simply leave. I'm the Duchess of Ravenswood, yes, a title that currently means you're the most pitied woman in London." Agatha's tone was brisk, but not unkind. "Your husband has made it clear he doesn't want you here. Society has decided you're a figure of ridicule. Remaining in this house will accomplish nothing except your complete misery." Eleanor felt something stir within her, a tiny spark of rebellion. "What would I do in Bath?" "Live," Agatha said simply. "Think. Discover who you are beyond being someone's daughter or someone's unwanted wife. I have a circle of friends, writers, reformers, artists, intellectuals, people who value substance over status. Come with me, Eleanor. Give yourself time to heal and grow strong." It took Eleanor less than an hour to make her decision. She left a brief note for the household steward, packed 2 trunks, and departed London without a backward glance. Bath was a revelation. Agatha's home was an elegant townhouse near the Royal Crescent, filled with books, art, and the constant flow of fascinating visitors. Within a week, Eleanor found herself attending lectures on social reform, discussing literature with published authors, and meeting women who had carved out independent lives despite society's constraints. One evening, at a small gathering in Agatha's drawing room, Eleanor met Dr. Christopher Aldridge, a physician who had recently returned from studying advanced surgical techniques in Vienna. He was perhaps 35, with kind hazel eyes, sandy hair, and an earnest manner that put people immediately at ease. "Your Grace," he said when Agatha introduced them, "I've heard you have an interest in charitable work. I'm establishing a clinic for the working poor in Bath. Perhaps you might consider lending your support." It was the first time since her marriage that someone had addressed her as though she might have something valuable to offer beyond her title. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "I would be honoured, Dr. Aldridge," she said softly. Over the following weeks, Eleanor threw herself into work at the clinic. She had no medical training, but she could organise supplies, keep records, and offer comfort to frightened patients. Dr. Aldridge proved to be a patient teacher, explaining treatments and procedures, valuing her questions and observations. "You have a natural aptitude for this," he told her one afternoon as they inventoried medicines. "Have you ever considered formal study?" Eleanor laughed bitterly. "I'm a duchess. Duchesses host balls and embroider cushions. They don't study medicine." "Why not?" Christopher's gaze was direct and challenging. "Who made that rule? And why must you follow it?" It was a question that haunted Eleanor in the best possible way. For the first time in her life, she began to imagine a future that wasn't dictated by others' expectations. 3 months in Bath transformed Eleanor in ways she had never imagined possible. The frightened, humiliated bride who had fled London was gradually replaced by a woman discovering her own strength and purpose. She rose early each morning to work at Dr. Aldridge's clinic, spent afternoons in Agatha's library studying medical texts and social philosophy, and evenings in stimulating conversation with people who valued her mind rather than her title. Christopher Aldridge had become a dear friend, perhaps her first true friend. He treated her with a respect that was entirely novel, asking her opinions on patient care, trusting her judgment, and never once treating her as fragile or ornamental. There was nothing romantic in their relationship, but there was genuine warmth and mutual admiration. "You should consider writing about your observations," Christopher suggested one afternoon as they walked through the Sydney Gardens. Your insights into how poverty affects health outcomes are quite astute. The medical journals would benefit from such perspectives. Eleanor felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. I'm not qualified to... Qualification comes from knowledge and experience, not from degrees granted by institutions that won't admit women. Christopher interrupted gently. You have both. Don't diminish yourself. It was Agatha, however, who forced Eleanor to confront the reality she had been avoiding. You've received another letter from Ravenswood, Agatha said one morning, holding up the cream envelope with its ducal seal. It was the 5th such letter in as many weeks. Eleanor didn't reach for it. What does he want this time? The same as before, I imagine, for you to return and fulfill your duties as Duchess. Agatha set the letter on the breakfast table. Eleanor, you cannot hide in Bath forever. At some point you must face your husband and your marriage. He made it clear he doesn't want a wife. He wants a housekeeper with a title. Perhaps. Or perhaps he's a deeply damaged man who doesn't know how to want anything. Agatha's voice softened. Those scars you told me about, they speak of horrors we can only imagine. Trauma changes people, makes them build walls to survive, but walls can be dismantled, if both parties are willing. Eleanor finally opened the letter. Callum's handwriting was bold and precise, his message characteristically brief. Your presence is required in London for the Duchess of Marlborough's charity gala. As my wife, your absence would be noted and remarked upon. I expect you to fulfill this obligation. The carriage will be sent on the 15th. He doesn't ask, Eleanor said bitterly. He commands. Then command back, Agatha replied. You are not the same frightened girl who left London. Show him, show them all, who you've become. The idea took root. Eleanor spent the next week preparing with military precision. She commissioned a new gown from Bath's finest modiste, a stunning creation in deep sapphire silk that brought out the grey of her eyes and displayed a confidence the old Eleanor would never have possessed. She studied the guest list for the gala, researching the charitable causes and social dynamics. She armed herself with knowledge, poise, and determination. When she arrived in London, she went directly to Ravenswood House without sending word ahead. The butler's eyes widened in surprise when he opened the door. Your Grace, we were not expecting, that is, His Grace did not mention. Is my husband in residence? Eleanor asked coolly, sweeping past him into the entrance hall. Yes, Your Grace. He is in his study. Eleanor didn't wait to be announced. She walked directly to the study and opened the door without knocking. Callum was seated behind his massive desk, reviewing documents. He looked up sharply at the intrusion, and for a moment something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps even relief, before his customary mask slammed back into place. Eleanor, he stood slowly. I didn't expect you until tomorrow. Clearly. She closed the door behind her and moved further into the room, studying him openly. He looked thinner than she remembered, with shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. I received your summons. It was not a summons. It was a request. It read like a command. Eleanor sat down in one of the leather chairs without being invited, a small act of defiance that made his eyebrows rise slightly. Nevertheless, I am here. I will attend the gala as your Duchess. I will smile and make conversation and reflect well upon your name, but we need to establish new terms for this arrangement. Callum's expression hardened. I was not aware the terms were negotiable. They weren't. Now they are. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. I have spent 3 months in Bath, discovering that I am more than a decorative object to be placed in your home when convenient. I have skills, interests, and purposes beyond hosting your dinners. If I am to be your Duchess, you will respect that. What exactly are you proposing? I will fulfill my social obligations as required. In return, you will not interfere with my charitable work or my studies. I wish to continue my association with Dr. Aldridge's clinic and to establish a similar facility here in London. I will need funding and your public support. Callum's jaw tightened at the mention of Christopher's name. This Dr. Aldridge, what is the nature of your relationship with him? He is my friend and colleague. Nothing more." Eleanor paused, then added deliberately, "Though I note you feel entitled to question my associations while maintaining absolute privacy about your own." A tense silence stretched between them. Finally, Callum said, "Very well, establish your clinic. I will provide the funding, but you will be discreet and ensure no scandal attaches to my name." "Agreed." Eleanor rose to leave, then turned back. "One more thing. Those scars on your back, I have not forgotten them and I have not spoken of them to anyone, but I want you to know that I understand they are part of why you are the way you are. I don't expect you to explain or confide in me, but I will not accept cruelty disguised as indifference. If we must live this half-life together, we will do so with basic human decency." She left before he could respond, her heart pounding but her head held high. The Duchess of Marlborough's gala was the social event of the season, held at Marlborough House with hundreds of guests from the highest echelons of society. Eleanor arrived on Callum's arm, her sapphire gown causing audible gasps as they entered the ballroom. She was no longer the humiliated bride of 3 months ago. She moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, engaging in intelligent conversation about the evening's charitable cause, funding for orphanages, and impressing even the most skeptical matrons with her knowledge and poise. "Your Grace, you are quite transformed," the Duchess of Marlborough observed. "We had heard you were unwell and recuperating in the country." "I was visiting my aunt in Bath," Eleanor replied smoothly. "It was most restorative." Across the room, she spotted Lady Vivian Hartley, who was watching with barely concealed fury. Vivian had clearly expected Eleanor to remain broken and hidden. Instead, here was a duchess who outshone her in every way. The confrontation came during the supper interval. Eleanor was speaking with Christopher Aldridge, who had been invited due to his growing reputation in medical circles, when Vivian approached with a brittle smile. "Your Grace, how lovely to see you've recovered from your wedding night trauma," Vivian said sweetly, her voice pitched to carry. "And Dr. Aldridge, how charming that the Duchess has found such attentive companionship during her husband's absence." Christopher stiffened, but Eleanor merely smiled. "Lady Vivian, how kind of you to concern yourself with my well-being. Doctor, Aldridge and I have been collaborating on a medical clinic for the poor, a cause I'm sure you would find fascinating, given your evident passion for charitable work." The barb hit home. Vivian was notorious for avoiding any actual charitable labor. "How noble," Vivian replied acidly, "though one wonders if the Duke approves of his wife spending so much time in the company of other men. Some might call it indiscreet." "Some might call your behavior at my wedding breakfast indiscreet," Eleanor countered, her voice still pleasant but her eyes hard as steel. "Yet here you are, still received in society. Remarkable how different standards apply to different people." Before Vivian could respond, Callum appeared at Eleanor's side. His hand settled at the small of her back, a gesture of possession and support that surprised her. "Lady Vivian," he said coldly, "I believe your mother is looking for you." Vivian's face flushed with humiliation. She opened her mouth to retort, then thought better of it and stalked away. "Thank you," Eleanor said quietly to Callum. "You handled her well enough on your own," he replied, something that might have been approval in his tone. "But I thought it time to make my position clear. You are my Duchess. That means something." Later that evening, as they prepared to depart, the Duchess of Marlborough approached them both. "Your Graces, I wonder if you might consider hosting the autumn charity ball. It would be a wonderful opportunity to showcase your partnership." Eleanor glanced at Callum, expecting him to refuse. Instead, he said, "My wife will decide. If she wishes to host, I will support her." It was a small concession, but it felt like a victory. As they rode home in the carriage, Eleanor dared to hope that perhaps their marriage might become something more than a cold arrangement after all. "The clinic you wish to establish," Callum said into the darkness. "Tell me about it." And for the first time since their wedding, they talked, truly talked, about something that mattered. The weeks following the gala brought an unexpected shift in the dynamics of Eleanor and Callum's marriage. Though they maintained separate bedchambers and lived largely independent lives, a tentative respect had begun to grow between them. Callum attended meetings about the clinic Eleanor was establishing in Whitechapel, offering practical advice about property acquisition and staffing. Eleanor, in turn, began to understand the immense pressures he faced managing his vast estates and business interests. They dined together most evenings now, conversations that had once been stilted and brief gradually expanding to include discussions of politics, literature, and social reform. Eleanor discovered that beneath Callum's cold exterior lay a sharp intellect and occasionally a dry wit that surprised her into laughter. But the walls around his heart remained firmly in place. He never spoke of his past, never explained the scars, never allowed their relationship to venture beyond cordial partnership. And Eleanor, remembering her promise, did not push. It was Christopher Aldridge who inadvertently changed everything. He had come to London to consult on the new clinic's design, and Eleanor had invited him to dinner at Ravenswood House. The evening had been pleasant, with Christopher and Callum discovering a shared interest in modern engineering. As Christopher prepared to depart, he turned to Eleanor with an expression of unusual seriousness. "Your Grace, might I speak with you privately for a moment?" They stepped into the library, while Callum remained in the drawing room. Christopher took Eleanor's hands in his kind face troubled. "Eleanor, I must tell you something, before rumours reach you another way. I have been offered a position, chief surgeon at a new hospital being established in Edinburgh. It is an extraordinary opportunity, one I cannot refuse." Eleanor felt a pang of loss, but managed a smile. "Christopher, that's wonderful. You deserve this. There's more." He hesitated, then continued. "I have asked Miss Caroline Winters, you remember her from Bath, the schoolteacher, to accompany me as my wife. She has accepted." Eleanor's smile became genuine. "I'm so happy for you both. Caroline is a remarkable woman." "She is. And I wanted you to know, before I left, that your friendship has meant the world to me. You are one of the finest people I have ever known." He squeezed her hands gently. "But I also wanted to tell you something I have observed these past months. Your husband looks at you when you're not watching. There is something in his eyes, longing, perhaps, or regret. I think he cares for you more than he allows himself to show. Christopher, I know it's not my place, but you deserve to be happy, Eleanor. Truly happy. Don't give up on that possibility." He kissed her cheek in farewell and departed. Eleanor stood in the library for a long moment, her mind churning. When she returned to the drawing room, she found Callum standing by the window, his posture rigid. "He's leaving for Scotland," Eleanor said quietly. "He's getting married." "I heard." Callum's voice was carefully neutral. "You will miss him." "I will miss his friendship, yes." Eleanor moved closer, studying her husband's profile. "Callum, there was never anything improper between us. You must know that." "I know." He turned to face her, and for once his mask had slipped. His eyes held a tumult of emotions she couldn't quite decipher. "But I also know that he could offer you things I cannot. Warmth, openness, a real marriage. He offered me friendship and respect. You have begun to offer me the same." "It's not enough." The words burst from him with unexpected vehemence. "You deserve more than a husband who can barely stand to be touched, who flinches from intimacy, who—" He stopped abruptly, as though realizing he had said too much. Eleanor's heart ached at the raw pain in his voice. "What happened to you, Callum? Who hurt you so badly that you've locked yourself away from the world?" For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, he began to speak. "My father was not the noble gentleman society believed him to be. Behind closed doors, he was a monster. My mother died when I was 8, and after that, there was no one to restrain him. He believed that pain built character, that suffering made men strong. The scars you saw, those are only the visible ones." Eleanor felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "How old were you when it started?" "8. It continued until I was 17 and finally grew large enough to fight back. I broke his arm and 3 of his ribs. He never touched me again, but the damage was done." Callum's voice was hollow, distant. "I learned that love is a weapon people use to control you. That vulnerability is dangerous. That the only way to survive is to feel nothing." "But you're not surviving," Eleanor whispered. "You're barely living." "I know." He met her eyes, and she saw such desolation there that it took her breath away. "When I married you, I thought I could maintain the walls, keep you at a distance, protect myself. But you've been dismantling them brick by brick without even trying. The way you speak your mind, the way you've transformed yourself, the way you look at me sometimes as though you see past all the armor. It terrifies me." Eleanor closed the distance between them, standing so close she could feel the heat of his body. "I'm terrified too. This marriage has been nothing like I imagined. But somewhere along the way, I stopped wanting it to be a mere arrangement. I want more, Callum. I want a real partnership, perhaps someday even affection. I don't know if I'm capable of that. Then we'll discover it together." She reached up slowly, giving him time to pull away, and touched his face. He flinched but didn't retreat. "I'm not asking for declarations of love or grand gestures. I'm asking for honesty, for effort, for the possibility of something real." Callum's hand came up to cover hers, his touch tentative as though he'd forgotten how to offer gentleness. "I will try. I cannot promise success, but I will try." It was enough. For now, it was enough. The next morning, Eleanor woke to find a note slipped under her door. Callum had been called to Northumberland. A crisis with one of the tenant farms required his immediate attention. But unlike his previous departures, this note included an invitation. "If you wish to see Ravenswood Hall and the Northern Estates, I would welcome your company. The choice is yours." Eleanor made her decision within minutes. She had her maid pack for an extended stay and sent word that she would accompany him. The journey north took 3 days by train and carriage. Callum was attentive during the travel, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the region's history. Eleanor saw glimpses of the man he might have been without the trauma. Intelligent, passionate about his land and people, even occasionally playful, Ravenswood Hall took her breath away. The estate sprawled across the Northumberland countryside, a magnificent Jacobean manor house surrounded by ancient forests and rolling hills. The house itself was a masterpiece of architecture, with soaring ceilings, intricate plasterwork, and windows that captured the wild northern light. "It's beautiful," Eleanor breathed as they approached. "It's home," Callum replied simply. "Or it was once. I haven't spent much time here since my father died. Too many ghosts." Over the following weeks, Eleanor threw herself into learning about the estate. She met with tenants, toured the farms, and began to understand the complex web of responsibilities Callum managed. She also began to see how isolated he had been, how the trauma of his childhood had driven him to avoid the very place that should have been his sanctuary. "You should host a harvest festival," she suggested one evening as they reviewed the estate accounts. "Bring the community together. Let them see their duke as more than a distant landlord." Callum looked skeptical. "My father never—" "Your father was a cruel man who ruled through fear. You are not him." Eleanor's voice was firm. "These people deserve to know the man you truly are." The harvest festival became Eleanor's project. She organized games, music, and a feast that brought together everyone from the estate and surrounding villages. Callum was stiff and uncomfortable at first, but as the day progressed, Eleanor watched him gradually relax. He spoke with farmers about crop rotation, praised the blacksmith's new apprentice, and even smiled, genuinely smiled, when a group of children begged him to judge their pie-eating contest. That night, as they stood on the terrace watching the last of the festival-goers depart, Callum turned to Eleanor with an expression of wonder. "I had forgotten what this felt like, being part of something larger than myself." Belonging. You've always belonged here, Eleanor said softly. You just needed to let yourself believe it. He took her hand, a gesture that had become more frequent in recent weeks, and raised it to his lips. Thank you, for seeing possibilities I couldn't see, for not giving up on me. I made a vow, Eleanor replied. For better or worse, I intend to honor it. 6 months had passed since the Harvest Festival, and Ravenswood Hall had been transformed from a monument to painful memories into a living, breathing home. Eleanor had chosen to make Northumberland her primary residence, returning to London only when social obligations demanded. The northern estate suited her, its wild beauty, its honest people, its distance from the suffocating expectations of London society. The clinic she had envisioned had become reality, not just in London's Whitechapel, but here in the village of Ravenswood as well. She spent 3 mornings each week there, working alongside a young physician, Dr. Aldridge had recommended, treating everything from childhood fevers to farming injuries. The tenants, initially suspicious of their Duchess's unconventional interests, had come to respect and even love her. But the greatest transformation had been in her marriage. Callum had not suddenly become demonstrative or emotionally effusive. Such changes would have been impossible for a man so deeply scarred, but he had opened himself in small, precious ways. He sought her opinion on estate matters and actually listened to her suggestions. He asked about her day and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. He had begun taking walks with her through the estate grounds, their conversations ranging from the practical to the philosophical, and slowly, carefully, they had begun to breach the physical distance between them. It had started with held hands, then brief embraces, then one memorable evening when Callum had kissed her forehead and whispered, "I am grateful for you." 3 weeks ago, he had finally come to her bedchamber, not with demands, but with tentative hope. Their intimacy had been gentle, almost reverent, and afterward he had held her close and spoken words he had never said to anyone. "I think I am learning how to love you." Eleanor had wept with joy. Now, on a crisp October morning, she stood in the estate's rose garden, supervising the final preparations for a gathering that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Aunt Agatha was visiting, along with Christopher Aldridge and his new wife, Caroline, and several of Eleanor's friends from Bath. It was to be a weekend of intellectual discourse, music and celebration, a gathering that reflected who Eleanor had become rather than who society expected her to be. "The roses are still blooming beautifully," Agatha observed, joining Eleanor among the autumn flowers. "Rather like you, my dear. You've bloomed magnificently in this northern soil." Eleanor smiled. "I never imagined I could be this happy. When I married Callum, I thought I was entering a prison. Instead, I found freedom." "Because you claimed it," Agatha said firmly. "You refused to be diminished by circumstances or by a husband's emotional limitations. You built a life of purpose and meaning. That takes courage. Callum deserves credit too. He's changed so much." "He's healed," Agatha corrected. "There's a difference. You didn't change him. You created a safe space for him to heal himself. That's the greatest gift one person can give another." The weekend proved to be everything Eleanor had hoped. Christopher and Caroline were full of stories about their work in Edinburgh, and Christopher was delighted to see how the Ravenswood Clinic had flourished. The evenings were spent in lively debate about medical advances, social reform, and the changing role of women in society. Callum participated more than Eleanor had expected, his contributions thoughtful and surprisingly progressive. She caught Christopher's eye during one discussion and saw him smile knowingly. He had been right about Callum's hidden depths. On the final evening, after the guests had retired, Eleanor and Callum walked through the moonlit gardens. The air was cold enough to see their breath, and Callum draped his coat around Eleanor's shoulders without being asked. "I received a letter from your father today," he said quietly. "He wanted to thank me for the additional funds I've provided. Your sisters are all well settled now. Amelia is engaged to a respectable baronet, and the younger two are thriving. That's wonderful news. Eleanor paused, then added, "You've been very generous to my family, more than the marriage contract required. They're your family. That makes them my responsibility." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Eleanor, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have said months ago." Her heart quickened. "What is it?" "When I chose you as my wife, it was purely transactional. You needed money, I needed a duchess. I told myself that was enough, that I could maintain emotional distance and we would both be satisfied with the arrangement." He took her hands in his. "But I was wrong. Somewhere between your defiance and your kindness, your strength and your compassion, I fell in love with you. Deeply, irrevocably in love." Eleanor felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "Callum, I know I'm not easy to love. I know I have scars, visible and invisible, that will never fully heal. But you've shown me that a wounded heart can still beat, that a broken man can still build something beautiful. You've given me hope, Eleanor. You've given me a future I never thought possible." "Gah, I love you too," Eleanor whispered. "I think I have for months, but I was afraid to say it, afraid you weren't ready to hear it." He pulled her close, his embrace no longer tentative but sure and strong. "I'm ready now, for all of it. The love, the partnership, the life we're building together. I want to be the husband you deserve." "You already are," she said, rising on her toes to kiss him. "You already are." The kiss deepened, and for the first time since their wedding night there was no hesitation, no walls, no fear, only love and promise, and the sweet certainty of belonging. A month later, Eleanor stood in the drawing room of Ravenswood House in London, hosting a tea for several prominent ladies interested in supporting her clinic work. Among the guests was Lady Vivian Hartley, who had arrived with her mother, the Countess of Pemberton. Eleanor had debated whether to invite them, but Callum had encouraged it. "Show her that her bitterness has no power over you," he had said. "Show her what grace looks like." Vivian looked diminished somehow, her beauty still present, but her eyes holding a hardness that aged her. She sat stiffly, contributing little to the conversation, while her mother apologized profusely for her daughter's past behavior. "Your Grace, we are deeply grateful for your forgiveness," the Countess said. "Vivian has been through a difficult time, but she is learning humility." Eleanor glanced at Vivian, who refused to meet her eyes. She felt no triumph, only a deep sadness for a woman who had allowed jealousy and entitlement to poison her life. "We all make mistakes, Lady Pemberton," Eleanor said gently. "What matters is how we grow from them. I hope Lady Vivian finds her own path to happiness." After the guests departed, Callum found Eleanor in the library, staring thoughtfully out the window at the London street below. "How did it go?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "She's miserable," Eleanor said. "I thought I would feel vindicated, but I just feel sorry for her. She's trapped in her own bitterness while we've found something real." "That's because you have a generous heart." He kissed the top of her head. "It's one of the many reasons I love you." Eleanor turned in his arms, studying the face that had once seemed so cold and remote, but now was infinitely dear to her. "Do you ever regret it? Marrying me instead of someone you chose freely?" "Never." His answer was immediate and fervent. "You were never my choice. You were my salvation. The best thing that ever happened to me was being forced into a marriage I didn't want with a woman I didn't know, because that woman turned out to be you." They stood together in the fading afternoon light, two people who had been brought together by necessity and circumstance, who had survived humiliation and heartbreak, and who had somehow, against all odds, found genuine love. Eleanor thought back to her wedding day, to the terrified girl in the ivory gown who had believed she was entering a prison. That girl could never have imagined this, standing in her husband's arms, secure in his love, confident in her own worth, living a life of purpose and meaning. She had been told she was his duchess only in name, but she had become so much more, his partner, his confidant, his healer and his heart. And in the process, she had discovered her own strength, her own voice, her own capacity for joy. "What are you thinking?" Callum asked softly. Eleanor smiled up at him, her grey eyes shining with contentment. I'm thinking that sometimes the paths we're forced to walk lead us exactly where we need to be. I'm thinking that I wouldn't change a single moment of our journey because every difficulty brought us here. And I'm thinking that I am exactly where I belong. As am I, Callum murmured, lowering his lips to hers. As am I. Outside, London bustled with its usual chaos. Carriages rattling over cobblestones, vendors calling their wares, society continuing its endless dance of ambition and appearance. But inside Ravenswood House, two people who had been broken by circumstance had found wholeness in each other, proving that even the coldest arrangement could bloom into the warmest love, and that sometimes being someone's duchess in name was just the beginning of becoming everything to each other in truth. If you enjoyed this story of Eleanor and Callum's journey from a cold arrangement to true love, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me which moment touched your heart the most. Was it when Eleanor first saw Callum's scars, when he confessed his love in the moonlit garden, or perhaps their final embrace in the London Library? I'd love to hear from you. And if you're listening from anywhere in the world, let me know in the comments where you're from. It's amazing to think this story of healing and hope has traveled across continents to reach you. Thank you for joining Eleanor and Callum on their journey from darkness to light, from duty to devotion, and from being strangers bound by contract to soulmates united by love. Until the next story, remember, sometimes the life we're forced into becomes the life we were always meant to live.